In all of my time being an adaptive music shill, Hades has always been one of the most talked about examples of it in gaming. But I was never really the biggest fan of roguelikes, and that in combination with Doom Eternal releasing earlier that same year, meant all of my time fighting hellish demons was spoken for. 6 years later, with the release of Hades 2 around the corner, I decided to finally pick up the first one to give it a shot, and I'm glad I did. The music in this game is phenomenal, and the hype around its adaptive audio is well deserved. So today we're going to take a look at Hades, analyze the unique elements of its soundtrack, and recreate its adaptive audio system with a song of our own. As always, timestamps to particular sections are in the description. The most effective video game soundtracks have a very distinct musical palette. The kind where only after a few seconds of listening, you know what game a song comes from. Some good examples of this are Persona 5 with its electric piano and organ, and Nier with its signature vocals and dramatic chord resolutions. Hades earns its place right alongside them with a unique sound all of its own. Instrumentation is one of, if not the most important part of developing a musical palette. If you look in the comments section of any original song I post to TikTok, you'll see that people strongly associate instrument choice with the game series they recognize the sounds from, even if the composition itself is not very reflective of it. It could even be a song from a completely different game. Take a look at the comments of Windmill Isle Night from Sonic Unleashed. Literally the only thing this song has in common with Persona 5 is the electric piano and organ, but that's enough for people to draw a comparison. So what about in the case of Hades? What are the elements of its musical palette? Well, luckily for us, Darren Korb, the composer, has been incredibly generous in the sharing of his process, so I'll be showing clips of him to help answer some of these questions.
A lot of how I arrive at what the style of music is going to be is by asking myself kind of a bunch of questions about the setting, like what is this place, what are the kinds of instruments people might play in this place, and that sort of part of the palette. And in the case of Hades, it was the sort of Mediterranean palette of instruments. It's in hell, so there has to be some metal, you know, is sort of my next thought. And then it has a quirkiness to it that I wanted to express. And so the sort of Halloween music component, that's where that comes in, that sort of theremin sound that's all over the soundtrack there.
So we have Mediterranean instruments, metal, and quirky Halloween theremin. This is a nice basis, but there's a good bit of wiggle room within these terms. For instance, what Mediterranean instruments did he use? There are lots that come from that area of the world. When he says metal, what does he mean? When I think of metal, I think of Haken and Gojira, but my dad thinks of Twister Sister and Quiet Riot. What even is a theremin? Well, luckily for us, I wrote these questions after I found the answers in this interview with HyperX.
You know, on the soundtrack I use the balama, the bouzouki, the labta, and some other instruments from the region. And you'll hear that melody there. It sounds kind of like a theremin, but it's actually being played on a Casio SK1. That's a little toy keyboard from the 80s that I just think has a fun sound. So I put a bunch of effects on that, and that sort of acts as my theremin. It's much easier to play than a real theremin. One of my big inspirations for this part, I was listening to a lot of Megadeth, Rust in Peace, that album. It's just, for something about that, it just has, it's melodic and heavy and fast and crazy.
And that is more than enough to finish out this point. We have some specific instruments, a specific band, and a specific piece of hardware. Now let's move on to the compositional techniques found in the soundtrack. One thing that you may have noticed when playing is that some of the music is not in the typical 4/4 time. Take a listen to one of the first tracks in the game, Out of Tartarus. It doesn't take long to notice that there's a repeating pattern here. We have 2 quarters followed by 3/8, a quarter followed by 6/8, and then 3 quarters. If you take this at face value, we get a time signature of 21/8, which would net you some dirty looks from someone trying to sight read this. What would make a bit more sense is to split this up into smaller repeating chunks. This ending bit right here could be separated into a measure of 6/8 and a measure of 3/4. Why not 2 measures of 3/4? Well, typically 6/8 is felt with emphasis in groupings of 2, while 3/4 emphasizes groupings of 3, but technically you can do whatever you want. That leaves us with this beginning bit here, which we can just say is the remaining beats left, 9/8. Hey, this is Editing Dad's Last Nerve. I just spent a good bit of time looking around to see if there was any official sheet music for Out of Tartarus, and that led me to finding this tweet from Darren Korb, saying that he did in fact count it as 21/8 when he was recording. Finding this tweet subsequently led me to this video by Jonathan Baruch, where he analyzes Out of Tartarus in like exactly the same way I did. I didn't know about this when researching, but I really wish I did because this video is a fantastic resource for understanding the music of Hades. Darren Korb also thinks it's pretty good, so I'll link it in the description alongside my other sources. He also has some videos on the Nier series, which I will be intentionally plagiarizing for when I eventually get around to those games. Splitting it up this way results in a grouping of notes that's much easier to read, and would definitely avoid the dirty looks we got before. Here's another example from the song Scourge of the Furies. This is a bit more straightforward, being an 11-4. Or just alternating between measures of 5-4 and 6-4. Thankfully for people who read sheet music, and for players that want to tap their foot, these songs also contain sections that are in 4-4. For instance, the entire A section of Scourge of the Furies is in 4-4. While almost the entire B section of Out of Tartarus is in 4-4. So another thing we can add to our list is to incorporate cool sections of odd metering. The last thing I want to touch on is the unique tonality that Darren Korb uses. Most of the Hades OST sits within the Phrygian realm, which is made by taking the minor scale and lowering the second degree by 1 semitone. That's not all though. In a lot of these tracks there's the use of the natural 3 scale degree. This would create what's called the Phrygian dominant or Spanish Phrygian or Spanish Gypsy or double harmonic major flat 7 scale. For our purposes today, I'll put this down as use Phrygian plus cool exotic notes, and I'll touch on why I'm being so vague later on. The song The Painful Way is a great example of the first part of this bullet point. The rhythm section outlines a pretty clear Phrygian mode in the main riff. The Exalted, on the other hand, is a prime example of what I mean when I say cool exotic notes. The main riff sits within the Phrygian dominant space, constantly playing the natural 3, with some cool sounding natural 7s thrown in for extra exotic flavor. And then at the loop point of the song, we get this quick stab with a flat 5. For the music theory knowers out there, you may be thinking, Phrygian with a flat 5? Wouldn't that make this Locrian? Well, maybe, but the natural 5 does play the melody a few beats later. And if we take into account the metal aspect of our musical palette, this makes much more sense to me as just a cool sounding note thrown in as flavor. I've been listening to metal since I knew what music was, and I can say from experience that the flat 5 is one of the most common cool and epic notes to throw into a riff in order to create dissonance and stank faces. If you're interested in digging deeper, I recommend checking out Cadence Hira's video on the tonality of Hades. In the video, she describes the sound as derived from an octatonic mixolydian flat 9 sharp 9 octatonic mixolydian flat 9 sharp 9 flat 13 scale, crafted by taking all the scale degrees from the main theme and combining them into one scale. If you boil this down though, it's also what I've landed on, the only difference being that she included the natural 3 into the same scale. For our purposes today, I'm going to stick with my own interpretation though. If we tried to account for every single scale degree found in the Exalted, we'd end up 2 notes away from a chromatic scale. Saying Phrygian plus cool exotic notes is much more helpful when trying to compose, as it gets across the main harmonic idea much clearer. Plus, I don't want to think about what would happen if I asked a musician to write a song using a decatonic mixolydian flat 9 sharp 9 flat 5 flat 13 natural 7. Hades has probably one of the most well-known adaptive music systems in gaming. This is especially true since the release of Hades 2 and the Scylla boss fight, which adaptively changes based on what enemies you've defeated. I'm going to keep on referring to Hades 1 though, since I don't have the second, but to my understanding, Hades 2 works in largely the same way. Very basically, this is how the music operates. In the 3 main areas of the game, Tartarus, Asphodel, and Elysium, there's a pool of 3 to 4 tracks that can be played, of which you'll typically hear 2. One is played up until the mini-boss, and another is played from the mini-boss to the end boss. There are of course minor exceptions. Shops, NPC encounters, and the Barge of Death and Asphodel all do their own thing with the music, but by and large this is how the music flows between the different locations. Each one of the tracks that serves this function are split up into 3 distinct arrangements of varying intensity, and depending on the player's situation, transitions between the 3 arrangements to match the action of gameplay.
So this piece, and all the other pieces that appear in a similar context, They all have three distinct sections. The first one is this sort of ambient shaker thing with some synthesizers that you heard at the beginning. This next part that you're hearing now is the sort of Mediterranean folk arrangement of the piece. And then later on, it kicks into a hard rockin' version of the piece. Same thing, just a different arrangement. So hopefully when you're playing the game, the idea is that it feels scored to your run and the piece advances through itself in a way that feels natural.
This idea of a song transitioning to a new version of itself is called branching. In this case, the song branches to a different part of itself, but it can also be used to transition into an entirely different song. Here's a clip of Darren Korb talking at a convention and breaking down the branching system. But before we watch this, I want to stress how incredibly awesome this is. We have the composer not only sharing how the system works, but showing the literal Fmod session that's in the game. This is not something you come across very often, so thank you, Darren Korb, for being so cool and open about your process.
Basically, after the first chamber or something, chamber or two, it'll advance to the following section when it hits the marker, right? So, same deal here. When you get to the boss of the biome or a mid-boss, it'll change to section 2, which is the Rockin arrangement of the piece. So, you're going about your business, you get to the boss chamber, and this happens. Then you're fighting Maker right here, and then again you take out the boss, and it goes to that little end tag there.
This branching system is not all that's happening, but to discover what more is going on, let's hop into a run of Hades and see what we can hear. Here in Tartarus, we're within the ambient synth section, but take a listen to what happens when I enter the next room. Now that there are enemies here, the shakers are introduced, and once the enemies are defeated, you'll hear them drop back out. In this next room, we're listening to the Mediterranean folk arrangement, and instead of going back to ambience once the enemies are defeated, something else happens. You can hear that all the instruments except for the bass have dropped out, and this same pattern continues until we reach the boss room, where we branch over to the hard rockin' arrangement of the song. This technique of fading in and out elements of a song is called layering. Here is a clip of Darren Korb going into more detail on how it works.
It's got 3 stems. It's got what I'm calling a guitar stem here, a bass stem, and a drums stem. And I'll turn them off. I'll solo them so you can hear them. So this is just the drum stem in this case. This is what's on the bass stem, even though it's not, bass per se. It's bass. It has bass elements to it. And then this is what's on the guitar track here, which is just kind of a pad. The way we've got this set up in Hades is we have a system where every time you enter a new chamber, it'll randomly play some arrangement of these tracks. So either it'll be all 3, just the bass and the drums, just guitar and drums, some sort of combination of that, and it'll re-roll that every room. And when you've killed the last enemy in the room, it'll turn off the drum stem.
So, I know that the man himself literally just said that when you kill all the enemies, the drum stem turns off, but I think the guitar stem is turned off as well. In all the time I've played this game, I've never heard the solo guitar stem play once you've defeated all the enemies in a room. The only stem that I think is allowed to play after all enemies are killed is the bass stem. That would explain situations like this. The bass stem being the only one allowed to play would also explain instances where the music goes silent and picks back up on the same song in the next room. Since the bass was not randomly selected to play when entering a new room, when the guitar and drum stems go away, we're just left with silence. Finally, I want to talk about how Darren Korb splits up the instruments into the 3 stems. He said this in the clip we watched before, but his labeling of guitar, bass, and drums is more a spiritual representation of the instruments rather than a literal one, although sometimes the instruments do literally show up, like with the bass. Elements that contain lower end information are put onto the bass stem, while higher end information is put onto the guitar stem. Where this gets interesting though is the drum stem. In songs that feature the lead theremin, I believe that is also included into the drums. Take a listen to how it goes away when the drums do. Now, some of my guesses here could be wrong, but I'm like 90% confident I'm correct. I cross-referenced all of my assumptions with notes that I took, documenting every instrument I heard playing in every corridor of Hades, pre and post enemies being defeated, and all of my findings there line up with what I've presented here. So unless Darren Korb himself strikes me down, I'm gonna run with my assumptions I made here today. Okay, so before we get started, I wanna run you guys through some of the prep work that I've done, as well as my thought process going into this production. So I took a look through some of the MIDI libraries that I had to see if I could find any of the instruments that Darren Korb mentioned. I found that this is really the only one that I had. You see here it says saz. The saz is just another word for the balama, and this is the only one of like a high-ish enough quality. It doesn't sound like fantastic. So in order to kind of offset that, I am going to use as many stringed instruments that I have access to and sort of incorporate them into the song in some sort of way. Here is just a normal, steel string guitar. Sounds like this. My parents got me this for Christmas when I was like, I don't know, 12. And then we have this one right here. This one is a nylon string guitar. It doesn't have as strong of a sustain, and its attack is much more defined. I got this as a hand-me-down from a family friend like 7 years ago, and I haven't changed the strings on it since I got it, and I don't know when he last changed the strings on it before he gave it to me. So these strings are old, but it'll be good because it'll be tonally different than the other guitar that I have. The last one that I'm including is my girlfriend's ukulele. Yeah, you can see there's a little link right there. Now, I know this is like super not accurate to what Darren Korb has going on, but I simply don't have access to the kinds of more exotic stringed instruments that he does. I'm not going to be using this in like the typical kind of strummy kind of way. I'm going to use this to support the main leads I have going on, to add like a higher octave, cool texture to the whole thing. All right, well, I don't got to apologize for anything, so I'm going to put this away. I'm sorry Hanging in the Balance isn't on streaming services. I'll get more Sonic Unleashed remixes done. By the way, Hanging in the Balance will be on streaming services. Don't worry, like, it will happen. So I'm not going into this just totally blind. Whenever I have an idea, I kind of like set up my phone, take a video of myself just humming into it. I've workshopped this a little bit off camera, but here's sort of the main idea that I had. So yeah, that's kind of like what I'm working with here. So I know that this idea is in an odd time signature. These are in 7. This is where it kind of changes off here. Yeah, so it's just an extra 2. So this is in 9, 8. So recording audio is going to be it's going to be a little tricky because I only have one mic. Just bear with me here. This song idea is based around Phrygian dominant, so I'm using a lot of the natural 3. Or up here, I gotta take off my damn sweatshirt. Okay, I think that's all of the acoustic instruments. Now I could stop being a damn fool with this thing. So now I'm gonna start mixing some of this stuff here. I think this is sounding pretty good. I do want to get as close as I can, but there's only so much I can do with the tools that I have access to. I'm my own composer, and Darren Korb is his own composer, and T. Lopes is his own composer, right? I'm always injecting a little bit of dad's last nerve into everything I do because I can't help it. It's just who I am. So I am quantizing this, but I'm only quantizing it by about 50%. And that's just so that it brings my takes just a little bit closer together, but it's not perfectly on the beat every single time. Let's start adding in some percussion. Oh, one thing that I didn't mention is Darren Korb actually uses Logic. We're almost getting the full Darren Korb experience here. So I'm recording this the day after the Nintendo Direct, and I gotta say, this E3 was quite exciting. I'll make a quick Dad/Nerf excitedness tier list. Final Fantasy Resonance, God of War, Wolverine, Doom, Rayman. That's probably it. I don't know, last three are like interchangeable. Final Fantasy is definitely on top. That looks sick. I'm gonna spend a bit of time kind of seeing what I can do about these balamas. I would love to be able to bring them up in the mix, but if it's too like MIDI-ish, I don't wanna do that. So we're forgetting about the lead here. By the way, this is a serum skin from Noise Department. They make really great preset packs. I'll probably use them on this for the ambient stuff for sure, but we just need to grab a sine wave. We need to make it mono and legato, and we need to make it slide all the time. Let's throw on some like crazy stuff afterwards. Cool, yeah, that'll work for now. I think I want this to be a little less slidey. Yeah, I really love this melody. This is cool. Maybe I'll add some counter melody to this. I'm not sure. I'm gonna come back to it later. Let's get that hard rockin' arrangement going, I think. I do want to try playing real drums. Okay, so here's the thing. I do want to record real drums. However, I need to get drums down before it gets too late so that my neighbors don't hate me. I'm going to allow myself 3 run-throughs of the song to get what I can get. There it is. Okay. Okay, there's one. One more. So some of the guitars are double tracked, obviously, but they're double tracked with different amps on either ear. So it kind of gives it a little bit more width. So I think I'm going to do the same thing. I think what I might do for this ending part here, I'm going to find the notes that are in the melody and put them into the power chord, even if it's a little bit crunchy. So besides getting all this stuff down, I need to make an intro and an outro tag to this as places that it can jump between for when you enter the boss arena and for when you defeat the boss. Oh, I gotta record all of the acoustic instruments. No. All right. Well. All right, so it's the next day. I did a little bit of mixing and arrangement tweaking off camera, but for the most part, this is just what you saw yesterday. So let's get into the ambient arrangement now. Here's a quick Logic tip. Notice that like when I play here, some of the notes are failing to trigger, and that's because they are overlapping each other. So if you just highlight them all, and then do shift /, and now every single note ends a little bit before the next one so that the re-triggering issue doesn't happen. Yeah, see, this is the kind of stuff that Noise Department really excels at. Again, I'm not sponsored, I just really like them. Yeah. Okay, I think I'll call it there. The ambience is not like super interesting to listen to because that's just kind of the nature of it. All right, so let's give it a listen from the top. First, we'll do the folk arrangement, and then we'll do the rockin' arrangement. Dude, that's freaking sweet. All right, so now we're getting into Fmod mode. In order to prepare for that, I'm gonna bounce out the folk and the ambient guitar, bass, and drum stems, and the hard rockin' arrangement can just stay as is. So this is Fmod. Not a whole lot to look at right now, but we'll get to it. As is the case with a lot of audio implementation stuff, there's like a trillion different ways to do the exact same thing. If I really wanted to, I probably could analyze that video of him showing the Fmod session and then recreate it exactly as he has it, but I don't really want to do that. Part of what I find so fascinating about middleware is that there's so many different ways to accomplish the same thing, and what makes sense to me might not make sense to other people. So I'm gonna aim to achieve the final result of the audio system rather than the audio system as a whole. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. First things first is we need to put something down here. So we'll make a timeline and I'll go ahead and populate this out. If we line everything up here, it should sound like it does in the DAW. Yeah, that sounds normal. But in order to make sure that transitions happen on the beat, we need to kind of map out our song. So that's where we'll start adding in tempo markers where all the time signature changes are. So I know that the song's in 156 and the first bit is in 7/8 and then it changes to 9 right here and so on and so forth. So now that it's all mapped out, let's set up the looping parameters. So we'll go here and we'll add a loop region. So the concept of looping works the same way regardless of what middleware that you use. We're setting it to end right where the reverb tail begins. But in order to make sure that the reverb tails are heard on the loop around, we gotta double click here and that'll open a transition timeline. And so you see here, this is the end of the loop point and this is the beginning of the loop point. You see that it says measure 1 right there. We can drag out from the end and drag in from the beginning, and then we'll add a slight fade out here at the end just so that we get rid of any pops or clicks that might happen with the audio file being cut off. And then we'll do that for every single stem. Okay, let's see how this sounds. Yeah, that loop's great. One thing to note about the loop regions for the folk and the hard rockin' arrangements is that we are setting the loop region to happen a little bit into the song. This is because we don't want to hear the intro every time we loop back around to the start. So this is the intro to the hard rockin' right here. But I have it so that it starts right there. So if we go to the end here and loop back around, it won't play the intro again. Yeah. All right, so now that it's all mapped out, I'm gonna add destination markers to the beginning of each of the important sections. Ambient, start. This is the folk start, rockin' start, rockin' end. All right, so now I think is a good time to start making our parameters. So a parameter is basically something that can be called upon by the game engine in order to initiate a change in the music. So we'll start with the branching system, and the only thing that the music needs to know in order for the branching system to work is what kind of chamber that we're in. So I'll go here to make it labeled. We need to know if we're in an intro chamber, a folk chamber, or a boss chamber. So now that we have that, we can go over here and create a transition region. And we want to spread out this region to take up the entirety of the looping segment. And if you come down here, you can see that we can set a destination for this. And so we'll set it to the start of the folk section. It'll only do that on the condition that the chamber is set to folk. So let's see if this works. And then if we go to folk, yeah. So that did work, but it happened immediately. But we can make it so that it happens on the beat. So if we go over here to quantization interval, we can just set it to 1, and that makes it so that the song can only transition at the start of every single measure. So I'll play it again, but you'll notice this time the playhead won't transition until it reaches one of these green lines. Yeah, there we go. And we can add a transition timeline to this region as well. So let's do that in order to smooth it out a little bit more. And then we'll rinse and repeat for the other sections. So for the transition to the hard rockin' arrangement, I'm fading the instruments out underneath the start of like the guitars and the drums, and I'm making it stop once the first palm mute is hit on the downbeat. So check this out. It makes it sound a lot smoother. Yeah. And then we need to do one last one here for the hard rockin' arrangement going to the end tag, but we can't actually set this up yet because our parameters don't allow for it. So we need to make another parameter being the status of the enemies on the screen. And we just need two this time. We just need if they're alive or if they are dead. So now for the hard rockin' arrangement, we'll set our destination to the hard rockin' end, but the condition this time will be on enemy status, and then it'll only swap there if enemies are dead. Okay, so let's see how this sounds. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, we don't need to worry about the transition region for this one, because if we did, then we'd be hearing drums over top of drums that are doing a different performance for like the brief second where they overlap, and that's no good. So now we need to set up the layering system. And what makes the most sense to me is I want to make parameters for the turning on and off of each of the guitar, bass, and drum stems. So I'm gonna go ahead and set that up. And now this is where it's gonna get a little bit wonky. So you may have noticed that when we were adding these parameters, different sheets were showing up on this timeline here. This is when we start adding in automation. So on the guitar stem, we'll go ahead and click add automation. So when the drum stem is on, we want the fader to be at 0. And then when the drum stem is off, we want it to be at -infinity. And so we'll do the same thing for each of the other stems. So we have that automation set up. So we're gonna go over to enemy status. I'm gonna set up a bunch of what's called a multi-instrument. And so I can populate this multi-instrument with multiple instances of any of these instruments here. But the important one for us is the command instrument. So if I click on this, I can make the command set a parameter to something. Since we're in the alive category here, I'll have the multi-instrument set up the guitar stem to a value of on. But remember, it randomly chooses whether or not to activate the stem. So I'll add in another instrument of silence, which will happen 50% of the time. So half of the time when enemies are alive and you walk into a room, the guitar stem will play. But if we swap over to the dead side, the guitars always turn off when enemies are dead. So we'll add another multi-instrument that always commands the parameter of the guitar stem to turn off. Now, I guess technically I don't need this to be a multi-instrument, but I think I'm just gonna keep it this way because it makes sense to me. I'll populate all of these areas with multi-instruments and then I'll name them so that I know what they are. So when enemies are alive, we want the drums to be on. When they're dead, we want the drums to be off. For our system here, I think I'm gonna make it so that the bass has a 85% chance to play whenever you enter a room, because I think it's kind of weird when everything drops out. I think it like kind of ruins the flow a little bit. I'm still gonna make it so that there's a chance like it is in the game, but I want it to be like a lower chance. But the cool thing with the bass is that it's the only one that actually maintains its alive status in the dead status too. So we actually don't need anything to happen here. So in the bass, we add a command instrument that targets the parameter of bass stem to a value of on, and then we'll have another one that targets it off. Make this 85 for turning on and then 15 for off. Okay, so that should be everything. Let's just give it a shot here. Dead. All right, so that time the bass turned off. All three. But now let's make it so that it fades in and out so that it just doesn't cut off immediately. That doesn't sound good. We right click on the volume knob here and we can add the modulation of seek. Basically what that does, it changes how fast it goes from 0 to nothing. It's kind of hard to wrap my mind around this knob though. To my understanding, it's kind of like inverted. If I set it to this right here, I believe that means that it should go from 0 dB to -infinity dB in 1 second. I believe. Okay, but I think I want to make it so that it's a little bit more of a fade. Yeah, so I think I'll make it 2 seconds by making it 0.5. I still don't really understand it, but I believe that's how it works. Okay, I mean, we're pretty much there. Let's try and do like a test run here, and hopefully if I set everything up correctly, it works out. Yeah, I think it's all working. This is awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's it. That's pretty much it. just for the sake of making it so that this is like a real game, I'll put a little loop region right here. So basically what would happen in a game is that it would play the end tag. It will continue on until it reaches this little area here, at which point it'll become trapped in here. It'll only stop once the game tells the chamber that we're back in folk, at which point it'll go back over here. And then in order to make it so that I'm doing this for like no reason, but I'm doing it, but it's cool. And then we'll make it so that the guitars and the bass and the drums do like a nice fade in from nothing, just so that it's not a abrupt change. There you go. So in order to kind of wrap up this video, I'm gonna pull up a recording of myself doing a run of Hades. And as I'm watching the gameplay, I'll puppet the Fmod session to match what's going on in the game, to kind of replace Darren Korb's music with what we've created here.
Come on, you knuckleheads. Lost it.
Should come in useful. I'm here, Meg.
Prince Zagreus, you are trespassing beyond the limits of your authority. I am under orders to stop you.
Come on, Meg, why so formal all of a sudden? We've been through this countless times. Wait, is it because...
Oh, come on, Civic. Let me just let you play along for once. Come on and fight me like you mean it.
See you back home.
Okay, and that will do it for this episode of the VGM Toolkit. So thank you guys so much for joining me. If you guys liked the video, please click every single button except for the dislike button. That would be awesome. But in all seriousness, thank you guys for the support recently. I just passed 6K subs, so thank you guys so much. I really, really appreciate it. If you guys have any other games that you want me to look at, please let me know in the comments. And on that note, if there's anything that you guys have questions on, either in this video or in my previous ones, ask your question down in the comments and I'll respond if it's something that I can elaborate on. Oh, and happy Pride Month, by the way. It was not my intention to cover Hades of all games during June. It just so happened to work out that way. All right, people, thanks again for watching. Take care.